When Jake Mitchell grabbed those scissors and cut Emma Rodriguez's long dark hair during lunch recess, he thought he was pulling off the prank of the century. But as her severed locks hit the concrete and she stood frozen in absolute silence, he had no idea he'd just declared war on the wrong family. By the time the sun set that day, his own crew would be telling him to run, and Jake would learn that some girls don't cry, they plan. Before we dive into this story of how one moment of cruelty became a masterclass in justice, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from today. Drop your location in the comments below, hit that like button, and if you're new here, subscribe for more stories about standing up when it really counts. Now let me take you back to Roosevelt High School on that fateful Tuesday afternoon when Jake Mitchell made the biggest mistake of his 17 years. The scissors made a sharp metallic sound as they sliced through Emma Rodriguez's hair. One moment, her long dark waves cascaded down to her waist, hair she'd been growing for 3 years. The next moment, chunks of it were falling onto the concrete like autumn leaves, and Jake Mitchell was holding the evidence of his cruelty in his trembling hands. Emma stood completely still. Not a sound escaped her lips. Not a tear rolled down her cheek. She just stood there, frozen, as if her mind couldn't process what had just happened. The entire courtyard fell silent, 100 students forming a loose circle around the unfolding drama. Jake's friends erupted in laughter. "Dude, you actually did it," Marcus wheezed, slapping Jake on the back. "Look at her just standing there like a statue." But something about Emma's stillness made Jake's stomach twist uncomfortably. He'd expected screaming, crying, maybe even a slap. He'd prepared for drama, for teachers to come running, for the satisfaction of seeing the quiet girl finally break. Instead, Emma slowly reached up and touched the jagged remains of her hair, her fingers moving with an almost clinical detachment. "Emma, Jake started, but the words died in his throat when she turned to look at him. Her dark eyes weren't filled with tears or rage. They were calculating, cold, like she was memorizing every detail of his face, every line, every freckle, like she was studying a problem she intended to solve. "Jake Mitchell," she said quietly, her voice so soft that everyone had to strain to hear. 17 years old, lives on Maple Street, drives a blue Honda Civic. She paused, tilting her head slightly. "You have 2 younger sisters, don't you?" The laughter from his friends faltered. How did she know where he lived? How did she know about his sisters? Emma bent down and carefully gathered the scattered pieces of her hair, placing them methodically in her backpack. When she stood up, she smoothed down what remained of her hair with both hands, transforming the jagged mess into something almost intentionally stylish. "Thank you," she said to Jake, her voice still eerily calm. "This is exactly what I needed." And then she walked away, leaving behind a courtyard full of confused teenagers and one bully who was beginning to understand that he might have made a very serious mistake. The rest of the school day passed in an unsettling quiet. Emma attended every class as if nothing had happened, her newly shortened hair tucked behind her ears. She took notes, participated in discussions, and even smiled at a few classmates. But there was something different about her smile now, something that made people look away quickly. Jake, meanwhile, couldn't concentrate on anything. During chemistry class, he kept glancing at Emma, who sat 2 rows ahead of him. She never turned around, never acknowledged his stare, but somehow he felt like she knew exactly what he was doing. "Dude, you're being paranoid," Marcus whispered during their shared study hall. "So what if she knows some basic stuff about you? Half the school knows where you live. Your sisters go here too." But Jake couldn't shake the memory of how she'd said his name, like she was reading from a file. How had she known about the Honda? He'd only had it for 2 months, and he was pretty sure Emma Rodriguez had never paid any attention to him before today. At lunch, Emma sat alone at her usual table by the windows, eating a sandwich and reading a book as if she didn't have a care in the world. Several students approached her, some offering sympathy, others just curious, but she politely declined all company. "She's probably embarrassed," said Brittany, one of Jake's on-and-off girlfriends. "I mean, her hair looks interesting now, but she's probably dying inside." Jake wanted to believe that, but something told him Emma Rodriguez wasn't the type to die inside about anything. During 7th period, Jake noticed Emma step out of class to use the restroom. She returned 5 minutes later with her phone in her hand, and Jake could have sworn he saw her typing a long message to someone. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen, and when she finished, she looked directly at him for the first time since the incident. She smiled. Not a friendly smile, not a sad smile, but a smile that made Jake's blood run cold. After school, as Jake walked to his car, He found Emma leaning against the blue Honda, running her finger along the hood like she was inspecting it. "Nice car," she said conversationally. "Your parents must be proud. Such a responsible young man, getting good grades, staying out of trouble." She paused. "Well, mostly staying out of trouble." "Look, Emma, about earlier." "Oh, don't worry about it," she interrupted, her voice bright and cheerful. "Really, Jake, don't worry about it at all." She pushed off from his car and started walking away, then turned back. "Say hi to your family for me, won't you?" As she disappeared into the crowd of departing students, Jake realized his hands were shaking. He had the distinct feeling that Emma Rodriguez knew a lot more about him than just his name and address. And for the first time in his life, Jake Mitchell was genuinely afraid. 20 minutes after Emma Rodriguez walked through the front door of her family's modest two-story home, the kitchen had transformed into what looked like a war room. Her father, Miguel Rodriguez, sat at the head of the table, his weathered hands folded as he listened to his daughter's calm recounting of the day's events. Her 3 older brothers, Carlos, Diego, and Antonio, flanked him, their expressions growing darker with each word. "He just grabbed it and cut it off," Emma said, her voice steady as she placed the bag of severed hair on the table. "In front of everyone. Like I was nothing." Miguel Rodriguez had built his reputation in their neighborhood through 25 years of running the most successful auto repair shop in the city. He was known as a fair man, a man who helped his community, who gave second chances to kids who needed work. But he was also known as a man whose family you did not disrespect. "Jake Mitchell," he repeated slowly, rolling the name around in his mouth like he was tasting something bitter. "The boy who thinks other people exist for his entertainment." Carlos, the eldest at 23 and a mechanic in his father's shop, cracked his knuckles. "Want me to have a conversation with him, Papa?" "Not yet, mijo." Miguel's voice was calm, but his eyes burned with quiet fury. "Emma, tell me what you need." This was why Emma had remained so composed at school. This was why she'd smiled at Jake Mitchell with such confidence. Because she knew that when she walked through this door, she wouldn't be alone anymore. She'd be part of something bigger, something that had protected the Rodriguez family for generations. "I want him to understand," Emma said quietly. "I want him to know what it feels like to be powerless, to be afraid, to realize he picked on the wrong person." Diego, 19 and studying criminal justice at the community college, leaned forward. "What do we know about this kid?" Emma pulled out her phone and showed them a series of photos she'd taken throughout the day. Jake's license plate, his locker number, screenshots of his social media profiles. "He lives with his parents and 2 younger sisters on Maple Street. His dad works at the insurance company downtown. His mom teaches at the elementary school. He plays baseball, thinks he's popular, has a history of picking on kids he thinks won't fight back." Antonio, the closest to Emma's age at 17, whistled low. "Little sister did her homework." "I always do my homework," Emma replied, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Miguel stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the kitchen floor. "Emma, you know we don't start fights, but we finish them. Always." "I know, Papa. You know we protect our family. Always." "I know. And you know that when someone hurts one of us, they hurt all of us." Emma nodded, feeling the familiar warmth of being part of something unbreakable. Miguel walked to the window and looked out at their quiet street. Jake Mitchell has no idea what he's stepped into, but he's going to learn. "Carlos, tomorrow morning, drive Emma to school. Make sure she gets there safely. Diego, I want you to do some research on this boy and his family. Find out who they are, what matters to them. Antonio, you'll be Emma's shadow at school. Not obvious, but close enough." He turned back to his family. "And Emma, tomorrow you go to school with your head high. You did nothing wrong. You are not a victim. You are a Rodriguez, and Rodriguez women don't hide from cowards." Emma stood up and hugged her father, breathing in the familiar scent of motor oil and Old Spice that meant home and safety. "What about Jake?" Miguel's smile was gentle but terrifying. Jake Mitchell wanted to play games. Now he gets to learn the Rodriguez rules. As the family dispersed to make their preparations, Emma caught her reflection in the kitchen window. Her shortened hair actually looked good, edgy, confident, powerful. Jake Mitchell had tried to humiliate her, but all he'd done was reveal who she really was. Tomorrow was going to be very interesting. Jake Mitchell's first clue that his world was shifting came at 6:47 a.m., when he found a single black rose taped to his car windshield with a note that read, "For the hair. We're even now, right? A friend." He looked around the empty school parking lot, his heart hammering against his ribs. Who the hell left flowers on cars? And what kind of psycho left black roses? He crumpled the note and threw it in the nearest trash can, but kept the rose, unsure why. At 7:15, as he walked toward his first period class, Jake noticed a guy he didn't recognize leaning against the lockers. Tall, muscular, probably college-aged, wearing a Roosevelt High visitor's badge. The guy was looking directly at him, not even trying to be subtle about it. When Jake made eye contact, the stranger nodded once like he was confirming something, then walked away. "Who was that?" Jake asked Marcus, who had appeared beside him. "Who was who?" Marcus looked around, confused. "That guy. The big guy with the visitor badge." "Dude, I didn't see anyone. You feeling okay?" During second period, Jake's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Nice backpack. The blue really brings out your eyes. A friend." Jake spun around in his seat, scanning the classroom. Emma wasn't in this class. None of her usual crowd was either. How was someone watching him closely enough to comment on his backpack? At lunch, things got worse. Jake was sitting with his usual group when Brittany suddenly went quiet, staring at something behind him. "Jake," she said slowly, "don't turn around. But there's like a whole family of people staring at you." Of course, Jake immediately turned around. At a table near the back of the cafeteria sat Emma Rodriguez, no longer alone. She was surrounded by 3 guys who looked like they could bench press small cars. All 4 of them were looking directly at his table, and when Jake met Emma's gaze, she raised her hand in a small, cheerful wave. "Those are her brothers," whispered Sarah Chen, who sat behind them. "Everyone knows about the Rodriguez family. You do not mess with them." "What do you mean everyone knows?" Jake demanded. Sarah looked at him like he'd asked what color the sky was. "Dude, where have you been living? Miguel Rodriguez basically runs half the east side of town. Those guys have connections everywhere. Carlos once made Tommy Brennan apologize to his little cousin by having him followed by different people every day for a week until Tommy was convinced he was going crazy." Jake's mouth went dry. "That's illegal." "Probably. But Tommy apologized, and the following stopped. Funny how that worked out." Jake stole another glance at Emma's table. She was eating her lunch peacefully, occasionally laughing at something one of her brothers said. But even when she was laughing, her eyes kept drifting back to Jake's table, like she was keeping tabs. During 5th period, Jake found another note in his locker. "Your little sisters are adorable. Megan's in Mrs. Patterson's 4th grade class, right? And Jessica just started middle school, growing up so fast. A friend." This time, Jake didn't crumple the note. This time his hands were shaking too hard to do anything but stare at the words. How did they know his sisters' names? How did they know which classes they were in? He pulled out his phone and called his mom. "Jake, what's wrong?" His mother's voice was immediately concerned. "You never called during school. Are Megan and Jessica okay? Are they at school?" "Of course they're at school." "Jake, what's going on?" "Nothing, Can you call their schools and make sure they're okay?" There was a long pause. "Jacob Mitchell, you're scaring me. What happened?" "Nothing happened, Mom. Please, can you check on them?" After he hung up, Jake realized that everyone in the hallway was staring at him. Word had gotten around about yesterday's incident, and now students were watching him with a mixture of curiosity and something that looked suspiciously like pity. By the end of the day, Jake had received 6 more texts from a friend, each one demonstrating an increasingly detailed knowledge of his life, his family, and his daily routines. The last one arrived as he was walking to his car. "Hope you're enjoying your first day of education. Class is just getting started. A friend." As Jake drove home, he kept checking his rearview mirror. He could have sworn the same blue pickup truck had been behind him since he'd left the school parking lot, but every time he tried to get a better look at the driver, the truck would fall back or change lanes. When he pulled into his driveway, his phone buzzed one final time. "Welcome home, Jake. Sweet dreams and a friend." Jake sat in his car for 10 minutes, staring at his house, wondering if someone was watching him right now. Wondering if Emma Rodriguez had somehow turned his own neighborhood into enemy territory. For the first time since kindergarten, Jake Mitchell was afraid to get out of his own car in his own driveway. Emma Rodriguez, he was beginning to realize, was not just any girl, and he was beginning to suspect that yesterday's haircutting incident was going to cost him a lot more than he'd bargained for. By Thursday morning, Jake's friends had started to distance themselves. It began subtly. Marcus suddenly remembered he had to study during lunch. Brittany claimed she was too busy to hang out after school, and Tyler switched seats in chemistry class to sit with someone else. "It's like they're afraid of catching something from me," Jake confided to his only remaining ally, Drew Peterson, as they sat alone at what used to be the popular table. Drew glanced nervously around the cafeteria. "Dude, Maybe they're just being smart. Everyone's talking about what you did to Emma Rodriguez, and everyone knows about her family now. What exactly do people know about her family? Jake demanded. Drew lowered his voice. My older sister graduated 3 years ago. She said Miguel Rodriguez is like connected, you know. Not in an illegal way, but like he knows everyone. Contractors, mechanics, business owners, teachers, cops. When someone messes with his family, word gets around, and suddenly that person finds life getting really difficult. As if summoned by their conversation, Emma Rodriguez walked past their table. She looked completely different now. Her drastically shortened hair had been professionally styled into something that looked intentional and edgy. She walked with more confidence, made eye contact with people, smiled more. It was like cutting her hair had somehow freed her from being invisible. She looks... Drew paused, searching for the right word. Dangerous, Jake finished. I was going to say hot, but yeah, dangerous works too. Emma didn't look at Jake as she passed, but he could swear she slowed down, just slightly, as if she wanted to make sure he saw her. Make sure he noticed how unbothered she seemed by his prank. After school, Jake's troubles escalated. His car wouldn't start. When he popped the hood, he discovered that someone had disconnected his battery cables. Not damaged them, just disconnected them. It was the kind of thing that would be fixable in 5 minutes if you knew what you were doing, and completely mystifying if you didn't. While Jake stood staring at his engine in confusion, a familiar voice spoke behind him. Car trouble? Jake spun around to find Emma Rodriguez approaching, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She was alone, which somehow made her seem even more intimidating than when she'd been surrounded by her brothers. Did you do this? Jake accused. Emma looked genuinely puzzled. Do what? I don't know anything about cars. She peered under his hood with apparent interest. Looks like your battery cables came loose, that's weird. Those don't usually just disconnect themselves. Cut the crap, Emma. This is you, isn't it? The texts, the flowers following me around. Emma tilted her head, studying his face with that same calculating expression she'd worn on Tuesday. Jake, I think you might be getting paranoid. Have you been sleeping okay? Eating regularly? Stress can make people imagine all sorts of things. I'm not imagining anything. Of course not, Emma said soothingly. I'm sure someone is definitely sending you mysterious messages and messing with your car and following you around. The question is, who could possibly want to make your life difficult? Who could you have possibly upset recently? She paused, tapping her finger against her chin in mock thought. I'm drawing a blank. You seem like such a nice, considerate person. Jake felt his face burning with anger and embarrassment. What do you want from me? Want from you? Emma laughed, a sound that would have been pleasant if not for the coldness in her eyes. Jake, I don't want anything from you. You already gave me everything I needed. She reached out and touched his arm, her fingers light but somehow threatening. You showed me who I really am. You showed everyone who you really are. And now we all get to see what happens next. Emma walked away, leaving Jake standing alone in the parking lot with his disabled car. 20 minutes later, after he'd called his dad for help and endured a lecture about taking better care of his vehicle, Jake noticed Emma Rodriguez climbing into a pristine blue pickup truck driven by one of her brothers. As they drove past him, Emma rolled down her window and called out, "Hope you get that car trouble figured out, Jake. It would be terrible if it kept happening." That night, Jake's phone rang at 11:47 p.m. When he answered, there was only silence on the other end. The same thing happened at 12:23 a.m., 1:15 a.m., and 2:08 a.m. Each time, Jake would answer to complete silence, and then the line would go dead after exactly 30 seconds. By Friday morning, Jake looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His friends barely acknowledged him. His car required a jump start, and he'd started checking over his shoulder constantly, convinced someone was always watching him. Emma Rodriguez, meanwhile, seemed to be thriving. She'd joined the debate team, signed up for student council, and somehow became the center of a growing social circle. It was like she'd discovered some hidden part of herself, and cutting her hair had been the catalyst that set it free. During lunch, Jake worked up the courage to approach her table directly. "Emma, can we talk? Privately?" She looked up from her conversation with 3 girls Jake didn't recognize and smiled pleasantly. "Of course, Jake. We should definitely talk." But as he started to speak, she held up one finger. "Actually, you know what? I think we should wait until you're ready to have a real conversation. The kind where you take responsibility for your actions and consider the consequences of your choices." "I am ready." "No," Emma interrupted, her voice still friendly, but her eyes hard as stone. You're ready to make excuses and bargain your way out of trouble. That's not the same thing. She stood up, gathering her things. When you're ready to have an adult conversation about respect and accountability, you know where to find me. Until then, she shrugged. Enjoy your weekend, Jake. As she walked away, Jake heard one of her new friends ask, "Who was that?" "Nobody important," Emma replied, her voice carrying clearly across the cafeteria. "Just someone who's learning that actions have consequences." Jake realized that every conversation in the cafeteria had stopped. Everyone was looking at him, some with curiosity, some with pity, and a few with undisguised contempt. For the first time in his high school career, Jake Mitchell had become the target instead of the aggressor. And Emma Rodriguez, the quiet girl he'd thought would be an easy victim, had somehow become the most powerful person in the room. Jake's weekend was a nightmare of paranoia and sleepless nights. Every car that drove past his house looked suspicious. Every phone call that went to voicemail felt like a threat. By Sunday evening, he was desperate enough to do something he'd never done before: research. He spent hours combing through social media, local news articles, and even his mother's high school yearbooks, trying to understand exactly who Emma Rodriguez was and why everyone seemed to know something he didn't. What he found made his blood run cold. Miguel Rodriguez wasn't just a successful mechanic. He was a pillar of the community who'd built a network of loyal friends and customers over 25 years. The Rodriguez family had connections to city council members, school board officials, local business owners, and, most terrifyingly, several members of the police department who brought their personal vehicles to Miguel's shop. Carlos Rodriguez wasn't just Emma's older brother. He was a volunteer firefighter with friends throughout the city's emergency services. Diego Rodriguez wasn't just studying criminal justice, he was already working part-time as a security consultant for local businesses. Antonio Rodriguez wasn't just another high school student, he was student body president at Roosevelt High, captain of the wrestling team, and dating the daughter of the school superintendent. Emma Rodriguez wasn't just some quiet girl. She was the beloved baby sister of the most connected family in the East Side, a family known for their loyalty, their generosity, and their absolute unwillingness to let anyone disrespect their own. "Jesus Christ," Jake whispered, staring at his laptop screen. "What have I done?" Monday morning brought Jake's world crashing down completely. He arrived at school to find his locker had been covered with printouts, screenshots of social media posts he'd made over the past 2 years, posts where he'd bragged about pantsing a kid in the hallway, posts where he'd joked about putting gum in someone's hair, posts where he'd shared photos of other students in embarrassing moments, always with cruel commentary. But the posts weren't just taped to his locker. They were everywhere. Bathroom stalls, bulletin boards, the cafeteria, even the trophy case. Someone had systematically documented every mean-spirited thing Jake had ever shared online and turned his own words into a public exhibition of his character. Students gathered in clusters, reading the printouts and shaking their heads in disgust. Teachers collected the papers with grim expressions. By third period, Jake had been called to the principal's office. "Mr. Mitchell," Principal Henderson said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk, "we need to talk." "This is harassment," Jake said desperately. "Someone is targeting me, making my life hell, and you're just letting it happen." "Someone certainly made these printouts," Henderson agreed. "But they're all screenshots of your own social media posts, your own words, Mr. Mitchell, your own actions." He leaned forward. "The question isn't whether someone is targeting you. The question is why it took this long for anyone to pay attention to your behavior." Jake felt his world tilting. Are you taking her side?" "Whose side would that be?" "Emma Rodriguez. She's the one doing this. Her family is harassing me." Henderson raised an eyebrow. "Do you have any evidence that Miss Rodriguez or her family is behind these printouts?" Jake opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. He had suspicions, fears, paranoid theories. But evidence? Actual proof? Nothing he could point to that would hold up under scrutiny. "I didn't think so," Henderson said quietly. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm going to be very clear with you. Cutting another student's hair without permission is assault. What you did to Miss Rodriguez was a criminal act, not a prank. The only reason you're not facing charges is because she hasn't pressed them." "Yet," Jake said numbly. "Yet," Henderson confirmed. "My advice to you is to seriously consider your behavior. Think about the person you want to be, and perhaps consider apologizing to Miss Rodriguez for what you did to her." As Jake left the principal's office, he realized that his support system had completely collapsed. His friends avoided him, his teachers looked at him with disappointment, and even students he barely knew seemed to regard him with contempt. During lunch, he found himself sitting alone at a table in the corner of the cafeteria, mechanically eating a sandwich that tasted like cardboard. Emma Rodriguez sat with her usual group, laughing at something one of her brothers had said. She looked happy, confident, surrounded by people who clearly adored her. She also looked completely unbothered by Jake's presence, as if he'd become irrelevant to her daily life, which Jake realized with growing horror was probably the truth. Emma Rodriguez had moved on. She'd made her point, established her boundaries, and rebuilt her social life stronger than before. She didn't need to actively torment him because she'd already won. Jake Mitchell had become a cautionary tale, a reminder to everyone at Roosevelt High that some people weren't safe targets for bullying, and Emma Rodriguez had become a symbol of what happened when quiet people finally decided they'd had enough. As Jake sat alone picking at his lunch, he began to understand that his real punishment wasn't the mysterious texts or the car trouble or the sleepless nights. His real punishment was becoming invisible. Tuesday morning, Jake's carefully constructed world of denial finally shattered. He walked into first period to find his usual seat occupied by someone else, and when he looked around for another chair, every other student suddenly seemed to need more space. The message was clear. Nobody wanted to sit next to Jake Mitchell anymore. During the passing period, he overheard Brittany telling someone, "I can't believe I ever dated him. Those posts were disgusting. That poor girl." Jake tried to approach her, but Brittany looked right through him as if he were invisible. When he called her name, she walked faster. At lunch, Jake discovered that his social exile was now complete. The popular table where he'd held court for 2 years was full, and nobody moved to make room for him. He ended up eating alone in the library, where the librarian watched him with suspicious eyes, as if she expected him to start causing trouble at any moment. But the worst part wasn't the isolation. The worst part was the growing sense that Emma Rodriguez had orchestrated all of this without lifting a finger. She didn't need to send threatening texts or tamper with his car or follow him around. She'd done something much more devastating. She'd shown everyone exactly who Jake Mitchell really was, and then stepped back to let his own reputation destroy him. During fifth period, Jake's phone buzzed with a text from his younger sister, Megan. "Why did Mom and Dad have a meeting with my principal today? And why is everyone at school asking me weird questions about you?" Jake's hands started shaking. Whatever was happening had spread beyond Roosevelt High. The Rodriguez family's influence was reaching into his personal life, affecting his family, making it impossible for him to escape the consequences of what he'd done. After school, Jake made a desperate decision. He waited by Emma's locker, determined to end this nightmare once and for all. "Emma, please," he said when she appeared. "We need to talk. This has gone far enough." Emma looked genuinely surprised to see him. "Jake, are you okay? You look terrible." Her concern seemed genuine, which somehow made everything worse. "Stop pretending. Stop acting like you don't know what's happening to me." "What's happening to you?" Emma asked, tilting her head. "Other than people finally seeing who you really are? You're destroying my life." "I'm destroying your life?" Emma's voice remained calm, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. "Jake, do you remember what you destroyed when you cut my hair?" "It was just hair." "It was 3 years of growth," Emma interrupted. "It was something I valued, something that made me feel beautiful, something that was mine. You destroyed it in front of everyone I go to school with, and you did it because you thought it would be funny to hurt someone who couldn't fight back." Jake started to speak, but Emma held up her hand. "I haven't sent you any threatening messages. I haven't touched your car. I haven't followed you around or made mysterious phone calls. Do you know what I did, Jake?" She stepped closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I told my family what you did to me, and then I started paying attention to the kind of person you really are." Emma's smile was sharp as a blade. "Everything that's happening to you right now, you did to yourself. Those posts were your words, your choices, your cruelty. Those people avoiding you, they're responding to your own behavior. That reputation you're so worried about, you built it yourself, post by post, victim by victim." Jake felt his face burning with shame and anger. "But your family—" "My family loves me," Emma said simply. "They support me. They make sure I'm safe." "Is that really so threatening to you, Jake? The idea that someone might actually care about my well-being?" She turned to go, then paused. "You know what the really sad part is? You could have just been kind. You could have treated people with basic human respect. Instead, you chose to be cruel, and now you're surprised that cruelty has consequences." As Emma walked away, Jake realized that several students had gathered to watch their confrontation. They weren't looking at Emma with pity or concern anymore. They were looking at her with respect, admiration, even a little awe. And they were looking at Jake Mitchell like he was exactly what he'd always been, a bully who had finally met his match. That evening, Jake's parents sat him down for the most uncomfortable conversation of his life. His father had received calls from Megan's principal, Jessica's middle school counselor, and even Jake's baseball coach. Word was spreading through their entire community that Jake Mitchell had a problem with respecting other people. "I don't understand how this happened," his mother said, tears in her eyes. "How did we raise a son who thinks it's okay to hurt people for entertainment?" Jake wanted to explain about Emma, about her family, about the campaign of psychological warfare that had destroyed his social life. But as he opened his mouth to speak, he realized something terrifying. He had no evidence, no proof, no way to demonstrate that he was the victim here. All he had were his own actions, his own choices, his own words coming back to haunt him, and Emma Rodriguez had somehow turned his own cruelty into the weapon that brought him down. By Thursday, Jake's desperation had reached a breaking point. His grades were plummeting because he couldn't concentrate in class. His sleep schedule was destroyed by anxiety. His family dinners had become uncomfortable interrogations about his behavior and attitude. Even his baseball coach had benched him, pending a review of team values and sportsmanship standards. Jake decided to try a different approach. If he couldn't convince Emma to call off whatever psychological campaign she was waging, maybe he could convince her family to intervene. Thursday after school, Jake drove to Rodriguez Auto Repair on the east side of town. The shop was busy, with several cars in various stages of repair and multiple mechanics working under the hoods. The smell of motor oil and metal filled the air, and the sound of power tools created a symphony of productivity. Jake parked across the street and sat in his car for 10 minutes, trying to work up the courage to walk inside. Finally, he took a deep breath and crossed the street. The reception area was clean and professional, with comfortable chairs, a coffee machine, and walls covered with customer testimonials and photos of the Rodriguez family at community events. Behind the counter, a young woman with Emma's dark eyes and confident smile looked up as Jake entered. "Can I help you?" she asked pleasantly. "I need to speak with Miguel Rodriguez," Jake said, his voice cracking slightly. "It's about Emma." The young woman's expression immediately became more alert. "And you are?" "Jake Mitchell. I'm a classmate of Emma's." The woman studied Jake for a long moment, then picked up a phone and spoke rapidly in Spanish. Jake caught Emma's name and his own, but nothing else. After a brief conversation, she hung up and gestured toward the chairs. "Please have a seat. Mr. Rodriguez will be with you in a moment." Jake sat down, his hands sweating and his heart racing. Around him, the normal sounds of the shop continued. Mechanics calling to each other, air wrenches spinning, the occasional burst of laughter. But Jake felt like he was waiting for an execution. When Miguel Rodriguez finally appeared, Jake understood immediately why Emma had been so confident. Miguel was not a large man physically, but he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had earned respect through decades of hard work and community service. His eyes were kind but sharp, missing nothing as they assessed Jake from head to toe. "You must be Jake Mitchell," Miguel said, extending a hand that was calloused but warm. "I'm Miguel Rodriguez, Emma's father." Jake shook the offered hand, surprised by the firm but not crushing grip. "Mr. Rodriguez, I need to talk to you about what's happening with Emma and me at school." Miguel nodded slowly. "Yes, I think we should talk. Come with me." He led Jake through the shop, past mechanics who looked up from their work with curiosity. In the back office, Miguel gestured for Jake to sit in a chair across from a desk covered with invoices, family photos, and community service awards. "So," Miguel said, settling into his own chair, "you're the young man who cut my daughter's hair." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Jake felt his throat close up as he tried to respond. "Mr. Rodriguez, I know what I did was wrong, but what Emma is doing to me now." "What is Emma doing to you?" Miguel interrupted, his voice still calm but with an edge that made Jake's skin crawl. Her family is, someone is harassing me, following me, sending me threatening messages, making my life hell." Miguel leaned back in his chair, studying Jake with the same calculating expression Emma had worn. "That's a serious accusation, Jake. Do you have evidence of this harassment?" Jake fumbled for his phone, scrolling through his messages. But as he looked at the texts from a friend, he realized how weak they seemed now. Vague comments about his appearance, mentions of publicly available information about his family, subtle implications rather than direct threats. "These messages," Jake said desperately, showing Miguel his phone. "Someone's been watching me, learning about my family." Miguel read the messages silently, his expression unchanged. When he finished, he handed the phone back to Jake. "Jake, these messages don't contain any threats. They don't mention Emma or my family. They don't even claim to be from anyone specific." Miguel paused. "Do you have any evidence that Emma or any member of my family sent these messages?" Jake's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "No, but who else might want to make you uncomfortable?" Miguel finished. "Well, let's see. According to Emma, you have a history of bullying other students. You've humiliated people online, physically harassed classmates, and generally made school an unpleasant place for anyone you decided to target." Miguel's voice remained steady, but his eyes had gone cold. "It could be any of those people, Jake, or their friends, or their families, or just decent people who are disgusted by your behavior." Jake felt his last hope crumbling. "But Emma's family has connections." "Yes, we do," Miguel agreed. "We have friends throughout this community, people who trust us, respect us, and care about our family. And you know what all those people have in common, Jake? They don't like bullies." Miguel stood up and walked to the window overlooking the shop floor. "When someone hurts my daughter, word gets around, not because I ask it to, but because people care about Emma. They care about what happens to good people in this community." He turned back to Jake. "You want to know why your life has become difficult? It's not because Emma is orchestrating some elaborate revenge plot. It's because you revealed who you really are, and people don't like what they see." Jake's voice came out as barely a whisper. "What do you want from me?" Miguel returned to his desk and sat down. "I want you to understand something very clearly, Jake. Emma didn't ask me to hurt you. She didn't ask anyone in my family to threaten you or harass you or make your life miserable. Do you know what she asked for?" Jake shook his head. "She asked for the chance to handle this herself. She asked us to trust her to stand up for herself and show everyone who she really is." Miguel's smile was proud but terrifying. "And that's exactly what she's done. But if you apologize, Miguel interrupted, it should be because you genuinely understand what you did wrong and want to make amends, not because you want to escape the consequences of your actions." Miguel leaned forward, his voice dropping to just above a whisper. "Let me be very clear about something, Jake. My family doesn't start fights, but we finish them. Emma has chosen to handle this situation with grace, intelligence, and strength. She's shown everyone at that school who she really is, and in doing so, she's shown them who you really are, too." He stood up again, signaling that the conversation was over. "If you want this to end, Jake, there's only one person who can make that happen, and it's not Emma. It's not me. It's you. You need to decide what kind of person you want to be, and start being that person, consistently, genuinely, every day." As Miguel walked Jake back through the shop, he added quietly, "Emma is proud of who she's become since you cut her hair. Can you say the same about yourself?" Jake left Rodriguez Auto Repair feeling more hopeless than when he'd arrived. He'd hoped to find an enemy he could negotiate with, bargain with, or even fear in a straightforward way. Instead, he'd found a family that didn't need to destroy him, because he was perfectly capable of destroying himself. That night, as Jake lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he realized that Emma Rodriguez had won without ever really fighting. She'd simply refused to be a victim, stood up for herself with dignity, and let his own actions speak for themselves. And now Jake Mitchell was learning the hardest lesson of his 17 years, that some consequences can't be escaped, negotiated away, or blamed on someone else. Some consequences just have to be lived with. Friday morning arrived with an autumn chill that seemed to mirror the coldness in Jake's heart. He'd spent the entire night wrestling with Miguel Rodriguez's words, staring at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, trying to figure out when he'd become someone he didn't recognize. The social printouts had been removed from school property, but their impact lingered. Students still avoided Jake in the hallways, teachers still looked at him with disappointment, and his former friends continued to treat him like he carried some contagious disease. But something had shifted in Jake's perspective after his conversation with Emma's father. The paranoia was gone, replaced by a crushing weight of self-awareness. He wasn't being hunted by the Rodriguez family. He was being held accountable by his own community for his own choices. During lunch, Jake made a decision that terrified him more than any mysterious text message ever had. He walked directly to Emma's table, where she sat with her usual group of friends and admirers. "Emma," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "can I please speak with you alone?" The table went quiet, Emma's friends looked at Jake with expressions ranging from suspicion to outright hostility. One of her brothers, Antonio, half rose from his seat as if preparing to intervene. But Emma held up a hand, studying Jake's face with those same calculating eyes. After a long moment, she nodded. "It's okay," she told the table. "I'll be right back." She followed Jake to an empty corner of the cafeteria, where they could speak privately but still be seen by the rest of the students. Emma crossed her arms and waited. "I talked to your father yesterday," Jake began. "I know," Emma replied. "He told me. He said you didn't ask him to do anything to me. That you wanted to handle this yourself." Emma's expression softened slightly. "That's right." Jake took a shaky breath. "Emma, I need you to know that I understand now. What I did to you wasn't a prank. It was assault. It was cruel and humiliating and completely wrong, and I can't take it back." Emma said nothing, but she didn't walk away either. "I also need you to know that you didn't destroy my life," Jake continued, the words coming faster now. "I destroyed my own life. I've been hurting people for years, and I told myself it was just joking around, just having fun. But it wasn't fun for the people I hurt, was it?" "No," Emma said quietly. "It wasn't." "I don't know how to fix this," Jake admitted, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to undo years of being a terrible person. I don't know how to make people trust me again, or like me again, or even tolerate being around me." Emma was quiet for a long moment, watching Jake's face as if trying to determine whether his emotion was genuine. Finally, she spoke. "Jake, do you remember Tommy Brennan?" Jake nodded. Tommy had been one of his favorite targets sophomore year, a quiet kid with thick glasses and a stutter that got worse when he was nervous. "Tommy switched schools because of you," Emma said. "He couldn't handle coming here every day, wondering what cruel thing you were going to do next. His parents had to uproot their entire family and move to a different district." Jake felt sick to his stomach. He'd known Tommy had transferred, but he'd never connected it to his own behavior. "Do you remember Sarah Kim?" Emma continued. "You posted that video of her falling down the stairs and it went viral. She had panic attacks for months because she was convinced everyone was laughing at her." Each name Emma mentioned felt like a physical blow. Jake had pushed these incidents to the back of his mind, dismissing them as harmless pranks or unfortunate accidents. But hearing them described as what they really were, systematic cruelty, made him want to disappear. "I know I can't undo what I did," Jake said finally, "but I want to try to be better. I want to apologize to everyone I hurt, and I want to make sure I never hurt anyone like that again." Emma studied his face for another long moment. Then, to Jake's surprise, she smiled. Not the cold, calculating smile she'd worn all week, but something softer, more genuine. "You know what, Jake? I believe you." Jake's relief was so overwhelming, he almost started crying right there in the cafeteria. "But," Emma continued, "believing you want to change and trusting that you actually will change are two different things. Trust has to be earned." "How?" Jake asked desperately. "How do I earn it back?" Emma glanced back at her table where her friends and family were watching their conversation with intense interest. When she looked back at Jake, her expression was thoughtful. "Start with the people you hurt most," she said. "Find Tommy Brennan and Sarah Kim and everyone else you made miserable, and apologize to them. Not because you want forgiveness, but because they deserve to hear you take responsibility for what you did." Jake nodded eagerly. "Yes, I can do that. I will do that." "And then," Emma continued, "you prove that you've changed by how you treat people going forward. Every day, in every interaction. When you see someone being bullied, you stand up for them. When you have the choice between kindness and cruelty, you choose kindness. Every time." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Because here's the thing, Jake. I'm not going to be watching you to see if you change, but everyone else will be. Your reputation now is that you're a bully who got caught. The only way to change that reputation is to become someone different, consistently, for years." Emma started to walk away, then turned back one last time. "And Jake, thank you." "For what?" Emma touched her newly styled hair, running her fingers through the shorter length. "For showing me who I really am. I spent years being invisible, being afraid, letting people like you make me feel small. But when you cut my hair, something inside me just clicked. I realized I didn't have to accept being treated badly. I realized I had power I'd never used." She smiled, and this time it was warm and genuine. "So thank you for that lesson. It's made me stronger than I ever thought I could be." As Emma walked back to her table, Jake remained standing in the corner, watching as she rejoined her friends and family. They welcomed her back with smiles and laughter, clearly proud of how she'd handled the confrontation. Jake realized that Emma Rodriguez had done something remarkable. She'd taken his attempt to humiliate and diminish her and turned it into a catalyst for her own transformation. She'd refused to be a victim, demanded respect, and shown everyone around her what real strength looked like. And in doing so, she'd forced Jake to confront the person he'd become and decide whether he wanted to be someone better. As Jake walked out of the cafeteria, he pulled out his phone and began searching for Tommy Brennan's contact information. He had a lot of apologies to make, and he was going to start today. Behind him, Emma Rodriguez continued her lunch conversation with her friends, her laughter carrying across the cafeteria like music. She'd won not through revenge or cruelty, but through dignity, strength, and an unwavering belief in her own worth. And Jake Mitchell began the long, difficult journey of learning to become the kind of person who deserved to share the same world as someone like Emma Rodriguez. The girl who had stood frozen in shock as her hair fell to the ground was gone forever. In her place was a young woman who knew exactly who she was and what she was worth. And the bully who had thought he could hurt her with impunity was learning that some people don't just get even, they get better.